How you doing? I get questions a lot on TikTok about how I can make my setup look much better than it already is. And honestly, it's not that difficult. It's pretty easy if you know what you're doing. And I thought for beginners, why not make a video on how to level up your setup in 5 easy ways. Also, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe. And if you want to follow me on TikTok, go ahead. But without further ado, let's get into this video. Starting off this list, we have utilizing a specific color scheme. Now, I know what you're thinking, and don't click off this video yet because it goes much, much deeper than just an all white or a black and red setup. If you're looking to have a unique setup, maybe you want to flex what you have on TikTok or some other social media platform, then standing out as much as possible is the key here. I mean, don't get me wrong, all white setups are so nice. I really like them, but they've been done hundreds of times. So we're gonna avoid that and go against the basic color scheme gradient. There was an awesome YouTuber slash TikToker by the name of Maisie Lee. She goes for this cozy aesthetic vibe, and I think we can learn a lot of things from her. She has this beautiful setup that focuses on this cozy type of vibe, and you definitely get that feeling anytime you look at her setup. Now, if you look closely at her setup, you'll notice that there are a bunch of different colors and shades at play here. She doesn't limit herself to just one or two basic colors. There's an entire palette going on. She's using this more complex color palette to achieve this cozy feeling. And if you read the comments on her videos, it's pretty apparent that she's doing a good job. Okay, so how do we achieve the same level as her setup? Well, unless you're an art major or someone who just understands colors, we're gonna need some external help. There is a website called coolors.co, COOLORS.co, and it's going to be immensely useful here. What this website can do is generate random color palettes, or you can go on the trending tab and look at the trending color palettes that other people seem to enjoy if you're that kind of person. So you have two different options here. These color palettes are meant to complement one another and make each color stand out in its own unique way. And the nicest thing about this site is the fact that when you hover over a color, it'll give you the hex code. So maybe you see a color palette that has one color that you like, but you don't like the rest. Hover your mouse over it and it'll show you the hex code, and then you can take that hex code and add it to other setups, other color palettes. It's pretty nice. It's pretty simple, and you'll find colors that you probably weren't even thinking of. Now, with this information, what you could do is go on Google and look up the kind of emotion associated with each color. So if you're going for a more creative vibe, maybe you're a content creator or a streamer, you're probably gonna lean towards that like shade of purple or blue or white, something around that idea in order to achieve that creative flowing feel. And yes, the way you perceive colors in your setup matters immensely to the vibe. It's the one thing people are gonna see the second they look at your setup. So do some research. It'll pay off more than you probably think. Okay, on to number 2, which is cable management. This one is a bit difficult if you're a content creator or just make things for social media, but trying as hard as you can to keep that form of clarity for your setup is still something you should shoot for. Wires are the bane of every PC user's existence. I still have trouble with cable management. These are just not long enough, but it's one thing that everyone should shoot for regardless of what you do. Wires are ugly, they're hard to keep clean, and they're just an overall nuisance. So trying as hard as you can to keep them out of sight is the best practice. And that's what I do when it comes to the bottom of my setup and the top desk portion as well. To start, the easiest way to clean up cables on your desk is to push anything that needs a wire more so flush with the back of your desk if that's possible. Having as little wire exposed between the beginning of the back of the desk leading to the product that it is, getting rid of that wire as much as possible is gonna be key. And then after you get a desk setup that you can admire, the next thing you're gonna have to fight, the next boss, is the bottom of your desk, the big boy, the wired heaven. This is gonna be where all of your wires pile up and fold all over each other, and it just looks nasty. It's a terrible sight, but it's actually not that hard of a fix. What you can do is get a cable management box. Now, this thing will sit on the floor unless you mount it under your desk, which I'm sure you could do. But essentially, you keep it on the floor and then you pile all of your excess cables into that box. So all you have are just a streamline of cables going in and out of the box. There's still cables on the floor, but all that excess is piled away. That's one way you could do it, but that's not the way that I generally tend to do it. What I like to do is keep the wires off the ground as much as possible, almost entirely, if anything, and get a cable management beam that can screw into the bottom of your desk, and then you can put your power strip and your wires into it. It's pretty nice. And if you're the kind of person that has a standing desk, then you're gonna want those wires off the ground as much as possible and nice and flush with some excess to be able to pull it up But again, that's if you have a standing desk. Most people don't have a standing desk. I actually have 2 of them because I like them so much. I have one for this, and I have one for my little editing station right here that you can't see, but I'll throw up some B-roll footage of both of these things. I have these beams that go under my desk that I throw my power strip and excess cables into, so that the bottom of my desk looks pretty good. You don't actually see anything if you're just kind of walking around. The only time you'd ever see anything bad is if you went under my desk and looked up. But how many people are doing that? You know? Come on. But if you're more meticulous than that, what you could do is actually get your power strip and mount it upside down on your desk. So the plugs would be facing upward. Like if this is your desk, the power strip would be facing down, but the plugs would be facing up. You get what I'm saying? Then what you could do as you're plugging in each thing is you can use command strip cable clips that will stick to the bottom of your desk, and you can run wires through them so that they stay flush with the desk and that they don't actually come down at all. This was by far the cleanest way to do it. The setups that you see on TikTok and on YouTube that have like 0 wires showing, this is basically how they do that. The only problem is it's the most tedious and time consuming. So if you really want 0 wires showing, this is the way to do it. This is more for those enthusiasts who are like, I got no wires, you know, those kinds of people, rather than just hiding it and calling it a day, you know. If you're crazy, do it this way. But overall, get those wires off the darn ground. It'll make you and your setup look so much more professional and something you can be proud of. That's the point. That's the point of this. We want to look proud of what we got, right? Come on, do yourself a favor. All right, on to tip number 3, and this is to add some life to your setup, which is gonna be pretty ironic. Adding plants, even if they're fake, they don't have to be real, which is why it's ironic, is going to elevate your setup like way more than you probably think it would. It's a practice that's becoming more and more widely adopted amongst setup enthusiasts, and it's pretty easy to understand why. They're cheap and they look good. Not to mention that added plants make a setup feel more welcoming. So if you're going for a cozy vibe, this is your key. You could go with real plants if you're more hardcore, but of course, like most people don't want the added responsibility. So if you don't want the added responsibility, fake plants are your route. But if you do want the added responsibility, you can flex with some real plants. If you live near an IKEA, then you could run there and grab a bunch of like fake or small plants for only like a couple of bucks. That depends on the size. If you're going for like a huge fern, of course it's gonna cost a lot more. But if you're going for like smaller plants, like mini plants, or like this one, go for like this plant right here. This will only cost you like a couple of bucks. I think it's nice. I think it's a cool green. Maybe you don't, but I do, and that's what matters. I actually have a big fern plant. I'll throw some B-roll up right now that marks the beginning of my setup. And I think that's a really great way to use plants as well. Mark the beginning of what your creation is. But I think by far one of the best ways to use fake plants, especially longer ones, is to hide exposed cables. I actually have this small plant that has like a long fern. Again, I'll throw B-roll up right now, that is hiding the cables plugging into the back of my PC. Now, it's obviously not gonna 100% hide them, but the fact that it's drawing your attention away from something that would be deemed ugly is a pretty big thing. But if you wanna go a step further than that, what you could do is go get some floating mini shelves, or you can get a longer shelf if you really want to. If you're allowed to drill in the walls, I can't because I live in an apartment, but floating shelves, you can buy them off Amazon for a couple of bucks. Throw them in the accented parts, I'm gonna have to explain this, accented parts of your wall decoration. So if you have like a poster, maybe you're gonna wanna, I don't know why I said it like that, maybe you're gonna wanna put a floating shelf, top, middle, bottom, or if you have lights, you could put them at the beginning or the like end of your lighting setup or whatever. Anything that would accentuate something, you could use a floating shelf and then throw a plant on top of that. If you really want to, it's just an idea. There's a lot you can do here, believe me when I tell you. So do yourself a favor, look at your setup, and look at the weak points. Look at the parts of your setup that you don't admire. Ones that you're like, eh, and then other ones where you're like, you know, that's killer. Go to those ones that are weak and capitalize on them. Now we're gonna slide over to number 4, which is accent lighting. Now, if you don't know this for some reason, the darkest parts of your room tend to be the corners. The craziest part is that when you light up the corners of your room, the room feels fuller. Enter RGB. Everyone's favorite FPS booster. Like I said, illuminating the corners of a room will give the room a fuller feel. And if you're going for a specific vibe, this is gonna be immensely important. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can go about adding light to your corners. You could keep it basic and just get an LED strip and run it up the corner of your wall. But the thing about LED strips, especially if they're shining out, is that they tend to be very harsh, which wouldn't really look good in recordings if you're that kind of person. So to make it look a little bit nicer, you can go on Amazon and buy LED strip diffusers. They're only a couple of bucks, depending on how long or how many you get. But if you run the LED strip through these diffusers, it'll look so much better than just an LED strip going up the side of your wall. You can grab diffuser tubing for like 20 or 30 bucks. Again, eliminating that harsh brightness, that harsh shine is gonna be pretty nice. It'll look way better, trust me when I say that. So if you're looking to get LEDs in the backgrounds of videos or just to illuminate a room, then yeah, this is a very great and cheap way to go about it. Or if you want another cheap way, you could go get an RGB floodlight. The nice thing about RGB floodlights is that they're cheap, they're usually Bluetooth, and you can use them to accent the corners. Just like I said, check this out. There's a floodlight right behind this computer, but you wouldn't know because it's hidden. Isn't that crazy? And here's the coolest part about the entire thing. My computer is the biggest thing in my setup, right? It's the most expensive thing. It's the thing I'm most proud of. Why not have a light illuminating and giving like this godly aura? Why not, right? It was like 10 bucks for a floodlight and I can control it from my freaking phone. Super easy, and it makes it look good. Another thing you could do is use Govi's products to light up your room. Again, with the corners, I think the best way to go about that would be to get their Govi Glide wall light. I'll throw up B-roll of what I have, which is the Govi Glide wall light. I use it to accent my Akira poster and my IKEA pegboard, which has all of my keyboard switches. So instead of having it in the corner, it's accenting or dividing, I guess I'll say, two decorations that I have. But because it's just a beam and it's already diffused, you could just throw it up the corner of a wall and it'll help everything in exactly the way that I'm talking about. These things look a lot like the LifeX beam. They can also be controlled through Bluetooth if you don't know what Govi products is, if you live under a rock. But LifeX beams are like twice the price. They're way more expensive. Govi's products are killer. This is not sponsored. I don't have a sponsorship with them on TikTok or anything. It's just good products and they're cheap. I recommend them. Another thing you could use if you have a larger budget and you don't really care too much about money is you could get Philips Hue Play light bars. I actually have 2 of them right here that I pulled out for this video. I haven't found a place for them yet because I don't exactly know how I'm gonna put them up to like hide them and whatnot and accent the room properly. But these are expensive. I can't really recommend them personally because now Govi has the same kind of thing like this. But if you really just want to go all out and get Philips Hue stuff, maybe make a whole Philips Hue room, you could go with these. They are good, I won't lie, they're just really expensive. But other than that, Govi's products will do you just fine. Okay, the 5th and final tip is to get rid of clutter. Now I know what you're thinking. Listen, I know it's tempting to just throw as much personality as you can into a setup because I've done it before. I know exactly what you're talking about, I get it. But there is a limit, there is too much at one point, and if you want to go against any of the tips, especially this one, because I feel like this might be attacking like too close to home for some people, go ahead, do what you want. I'm just gonna give you a guideline for what I think is too much or what other people may think is too much if you care that much, and if you don't, that's fine. You don't have to follow this tip. But the thing is, most people nowadays are going for a clean setup. That means a low amount of cables, no unnecessary desk space being taken up, you know, things like that. Now, like a lot of you, I like anime. It's something that I've liked almost my entire life, and I incorporate it into my setup as well. One of the ways I do that is through anime figures, and that's something that a lot of other people tend to do too. The problem here is that anime figures have a very low range of, okay, that's enough, and then it goes to that's too much. It's a small gap between that. There's essentially a low amount of things like collectibles that you can set on display before it hits that too much threshold. Now, if you do have a bunch of things you want to put on display, the best way to go about them is to separate them. And I'll explain what that means, but I want to give a story real quick. Back when I was in high school, I had this killer setup, this awesome room that I thought was crazy. I had like a huge TV, a killer PC setup. I had collectibles all over the place. It was what I thought was the coolest room ever. The problem was that nearly every inch of my room, including the walls and my desk, were littered with collectibles and items and stuff. And no matter how much I cleaned the room, like if the floor was immaculate, my bed was perfect, everything, it still felt cluttered. Maybe it was all those Funko Pops, but we don't talk about that. Now, contrary to societal beliefs, I was a pretty clean kid in high school. I actually liked to have my room clean because the rest of my house was a little bit too dirty. I didn't like that. It was, you know, usually pretty cluttered, so I tried to keep my room as clean as possible. But because of how many things were in my room, it still felt uncomfortable. Again, even if the floor was immaculate and there was nothing in my way anywhere. So if you like to collect a lot of things, the easiest way to incorporate them into a setup without it feeling overwhelming is to get a display shelf for them. I actually have an IKEA Billy bookshelf, more B-roll on the screen for you right now, that houses my video games, my manga, my speakers, things like that that are still part of my setup. They're still incorporated into my setup, but they're not overwhelming and all in your face. There's a specific location for those things. It's cleanly contained in a portion of my setup rather than littered about it. So again, you don't have to follow this, but if you want to, try and keep a clean and organized area for things like that. Try and keep your setup more calm and collected rather than exposed and all over the place. Too much is too much, and if you have a clear space or a cleaned off space, it'll keep that clear mind, which is definitely helpful if you're a content creator or a germaphobe. Yeah. All right, that was the 5 easiest ways to level up your setup as a beginner. If you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe, maybe like the video or leave a comment if you have a tip that I didn't cover in this video, which would be helpful to other newcomers. Be sure to follow me on TikTok because that's where I post the majority of my content. I'm basically daily over there if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. That's more where I throw like PC tips and stuff like that, very quick videos. So if you like that kind of stuff, TikTok's the place for it. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care. Dude, that lava will hit you over and over and over, even like if you...
Yeah. If you bounce through here, sometimes you can't get out of it.
Wow, that's funny.